We're only going to cover a limited amount of material for Chapter 10, only what's present in this screencast and the PowerPoint. I'm only going to talk about reproduction flowering plants. This includes plants which you readily recognize as having flowers, like roses, but also species which you may not realize have flowers, like wheat and elm trees. The non-flowering plants include mosses, ferns, evergreen trees. In flowering plants, the reproductive organs are present in the flowers. It's within the flower that eggs and sperm are produced. Fertilization occurs, and the development of a new baby plant begins. In some ways, plant life cycles are very different from those in animals. For example, plants have multicellular haploid and diploid stages. This is called alternation of generations. In this drawing, I've tried to show the basic anatomy of a typical flower. All of the flower parts are attached to the usually enlarged end of the stem, called the receptacle. Low on the receptacle are usually green sepals. Immediately above the sepals are the usually larger, delicate, brightly colored petals. Above the petals, we normally find several stamens. The stamens consist of an anther and a filament. The pistil is in the center of the flower. It's composed of a stigma, style, and an ovary. While usually green, sepals can be brightly colored. Sepals enclose the other flower parts while in the bud stage. Petals serve as advertising, attracting pollinators to the flower. Stamens are sometimes referred to as the male part of the flower. It's within the anther that meiosis occurs, which eventually gives rise to pollen, which contains the sperm. When a flower is successfully pollinated, the pollen must be deposited on the stigma of the pistil. The pollen then grows down through the style and into the ovary. Meiosis occurs in the ovary, producing eggs. It's here in the ovary that the sperm unites with the egg. Pollination is successful only when the pollen is deposited on a receptive stigma of the correct species. Usually the stigma is only receptive to pollen from different individuals of the same species. To help ensure cross-pollination, plants use several different strategies. In many species, the anthers and the pistils mature at different times. Chemical signals may also be involved. Only pollen from different individuals of the same species will begin growing on the stigma. Another strategy that is similar to what is seen in animals is the separation of the sexes, with some individuals having only flowers with stamens and separate individuals having flowers that contain only pistils. Cottonwood trees are an example where we see the separation of the sexes. This diagram represents a typical flowering plant life cycle. The sporophyte is the green, leafy, diploid plant. Think of an oak tree, and what you're picturing is the sporophyte. In its flowers, meiosis is occurring, which produces haploid spores. These spores, by mitosis, grow into small, multicellular, haploid gametophytes. Pollen in the embryo sac, which remains inside the ovary, are examples of gametophytes. These gametophytes produce the gametes, in other words, the egg and the sperm. Each pollen grain contains only 2 sperm. One sperm unites with the egg, nothing unusual there, but the second sperm unites with 2 haploid polar nuclei from the embryo sac. Nothing like this happens in animals. These 3 cells form a triploid endosperm, which supplies food to the developing diploid zygote. This zygote grows into a new sporophyte. Double fertilization is the union of 1 egg and 1 sperm. The second sperm unites with the 2 polar nuclei. This is unique to plants. For some reason, in plants, having a 3rd set of chromosomes produces a tissue that grows rapidly, storing food for the diplo embryonic sporophyte while it's still in the seed. It's because of these nutrients stored in the endosperm that seeds can be an important food item for animals. These are diagrams from your textbook showing the plant life cycle. This diagram emphasizes meiosis, producing haploid spores, which grow into the pollen. Each pollen produces 2 sperm. When the pollen lands on the proper stigma, the pollen begins growing down through the pistil to the ovary. In the ovary, meiosis produces haploid spores, which develop into the female gametophyte, the embryo sac. The embryo sac produces a single egg and also two polar nuclei. In double fertilization, one sperm unites with the egg to form the diploid zygote, which grows into the plant embryo. The second sperm unites with the two polar nuclei to form the triploid endosperm, which serves as a food supply for the embryo until it germinates and begins doing photosynthesis on its own. This ends the information that we'll cover in Chapter 10.